if you're anything like me, you watched some YouTuber play Inscryption with cool custom cards modded into it, and you thought, hey, that looks like a lot of fun. I would love to make my own cards for Inscryption. So this is just a very beginner level, simple video for how to go from normal Inscryption to having your own custom cards in the game. Now, I want to preface this by saying I am not an expert on this. I learned how to do this literally 3 days ago, so this will be not as in-depth as another guide might be, but it's something to help you get started. And that said, if you do need more advanced help, then there is an Inscryption Discord you can go to that has, or an Inscryption modding Discord that has a lot of helpful folks there. So I definitely recommend checking that out. And also feel free to use the comments to give each other advice if that's a useful resource. And with that out of the way, let's get started making some cards. Okay, the first thing we need is to make sure we're using the right version of Inscryption. So if you go to Inscryption on your Steam library and press the gear, you can then click on Properties and Betas. Now the important thing here is you can only mod the base version of Inscryption. You cannot use Kaycee's mod with custom cards. So under betas, make sure you have none selected and not Kaycee's mod, because otherwise things will break. Once we have the right version of Inscryption, we need the mod manager. So what we're looking for is this Thunderstore mod manager. If you don't have that, simply Google Thunderstore mod manager, and it should be the first result. It'll take you to this Overwolf site, and just press the download button. It's a very straightforward, just like click the exe, it'll set you up. So I already have it downloaded, so I won't go through that in case it breaks anything, but that part is very straightforward, and once it's done, it will generate this desktop shortcut. If you double click that to open it, you'll see something that looks like this, asking you to select a game. We're going to search for Inscryption, and there it is. You can select the game if you have other games you want to use mod with, or you can just say set as default. And you're going to check Steam if that's where your game is. And now it will ask you to select a profile. I just use the default profile, but you can have different settings on different profiles. And now we're going to need a few mods. The main ones are this Beppin EX pack, the modding API, the JSON card loader to actually get our cards into the game, and the in-game card creator, which does a lot of heavy lifting and making sure everything works. And then we will want the deck builder mod to easily test our custom cards. And if you want your cards showing up alongside the existing cards, so if you want your special like angels and demons alongside the wolves and elks, then you're good to go. But if you want your cards just on your own, then you'll want to remove the vanilla set of cards with the Vanilla Dead mod. To install those, you want to go to the Mods Online tab, and if you search in-game card creator, you can see it pre-fills. And since this one is dependent on the Beppin EX, the API, and the JSON card loader, you can just press download with dependencies, and it'll download and set up all four at once. If you want the other two, make sure to download them. I'll assume you're using them, but again, you don't have to. And once they are all downloaded, we can start Inscryption and get to work on our first card. So all you need to do is click Start Modded, and It will take a second because the game will be a lot slower to load with all these mods, but be patient and you can check these lines of text output to make sure there aren't any errors or things like that. So, we're in our modded Inscryption, and I'm assuming you've beat the game already. We're going to just be working in Act 1, so press the escape key and just select Leshy's cabin here, and you're going to see that I already have some cards in the game because I'm making this video in the middle of working on my own expansion with characters from a game I'm working on because I'm an indie game developer, not a YouTuber. So like and subscribe if you want entirely different content. Anyway, what you're going to do once you're in Leshy's cabin is stand up from the table, turn around, and move over to the door. Click on the handle and it will launch the in-game card creator. This is very straightforward. You will get a series of options to pick stats from. So, for example, let's say we want to make a strong salmon card and also a smaller salmon guppy that can evolve into that salmon. So let's give our salmon a stat line pretty similar to a raven. We can sort of base this off the raven and raven egg. So I'm going to click 2 blood, 2 power, and in a second here I'll give it, let's say 3 health. And now we're at the part where you start getting to mess around with some fun stuff. You can choose sigils for the card. I've found that adding more than a couple makes them not display properly, but we'll give this salmon waterborne. That should be good. And there's a lot of other ones you can play around with. Once you're ready, hit confirm, and it will add all of the sigils you've selected to the card. And now we get to choose tribes for it. Reptile seems good for a fishy card. You can actually give it multiple tribes, but I'll stick with just the one for now. And now the special abilities and traits are all of the secret rules that don't show up on the card but still affect it. So, for example, when you sacrifice a cat 9 times, it turns into an undead cat. Your card would have that sort of same niche rule to it if you select cat here, but some ones you'll probably want to keep an eye out for are you can mark a card as terrain if you don't want the player to be able to summon it, or you can mark it if you're like making it a 3 blood sacrifice card like the black goat. Marking it as goat will also make it a thing you can sacrifice to the Bone Lord for 4 bone blessing. So we're not going to select any for our salmon because it doesn't need any secrets, but they're there if you need them. Now we're at the part with choosing art for the card, and at the start here you're going to see some art I was using on my cards. It puts your custom card art up first, and I'll get to custom art in a second, but for the example we'll just use the art that's already provided in the game. So I'll use Good Fish for the adult version of this salmon because it's all grown up and it's good now. And you can see already we've got our stats, sigils, and art on the card. It's looking really good so far. And now we're choosing basically which pool of cards our card goes into. If you want the card to be something that only shows up when it's summoned by another card, you'd want to make it hidden so the player doesn't just stumble across it on their own. If you want it to be a card that only shows up in Leshy's box of rare cards after a boss fight, you'd want to choose rare. Or if you want to just be a normal card, then choose regular. So let's make our salmon regular. And this doesn't really matter if you're using the camera to jump back into the game after the tutorial, but You can basically choose at what point in the tutorial your card gets selected. Again, it doesn't really matter. I'll just say advanced. And finally, we get to name our card. So I'll just name this Salmon. And now you get to type the description. This is what Leshy will say when he first shows you the card. So for this one, I'll say something like, the salmon, as strong as it is delicious. Usually, Leshy will say something hinting at what the card's ability does, so if you want to be professional, you can do that. Or you can meme around, it's your card, have fun with it. Also, I should mention, on those text fields, you press enter to confirm what you've typed in. So, with our salmon ready, let's export it. So saying, yes, this card is good, we're saving it. If we're not happy with it, we could actually quit or make another without exporting, but since we still need to make our salmon guppy, we'll export and create another. I'll go a little faster this time because we already know what to do. Our guppy should probably be cheaper than the fully grown salmon. I'll make it a 1-1, sort of like a wolf cub. And now we want it to evolve. And some sigils like Evolve or the Frozen one give you some extra options you can play with, like you'll see in a second. So this fledgling card, we can make it just gain +1/+2 like normal, or we can have it turn into a different card. So I'm going to skim through these to the back where our cards will be. And there's our salmon. So now our card, after one turn, will evolve into a salmon. You can make it take longer if you want, for like a really strong card. We'll make this a reptile too. No secret abilities needed here. And now we can add in some nice art. We'll use bad fish because this is a weak fish. We'll make this regular as well. Again, complexity doesn't especially matter. We'll name it Salmon Guppy. Press enter. And we'll say, the Salmon Guppy. It will grow up strong and cool. It's a lot easier to think of descriptions when you're not narrating, but for now let's just export this and quit. Leshy's added a copy of it to our deck, so now we can go test out the card. You can see we've drawn a salmon guppy in our starting hand, so let's just play that down and see how it works. You can see it has all our Arden stats that we chose for it. It dealt 1 damage, which is correct for the attack it has, and it just evolved into our salmon. Let's just end our turn again. It dealt 2 damage. That works. It went underwater. Perfect. So that's the absolute basics of card creation. You could stop here, but I'm going to go a little more in depth. So now that we've made a card, let's make testing a little bit easier for ourselves with the Deck Builder mod. To do that, we're going to need to go into the mod files, which it will seem a little intimidating at first, but I promise it gets easier as you make your way through them. So I'll put the file path on screen, but basically you're looking for this BepInEx folder, and that has everything you need in it. The main folders we're worried about here are the plugins folder and the config folder. For the Deck Builder mod, you only really need config, so let's go in there and you'll see that we have madh.inscription Deck Builder mod CFG. This is where we choose what cards start in our deck, so if we rename this to a txt file, we can edit it without needing any fancy editors. Usually that's not a good thing to do to computer files, but in this case it does work. So here you can see the other custom cards I was using, but basically what we're looking at here is, by default, Enable Deck Builder will be set to false, so switch it to true. And then all you need to do is choose how many cards go in your starting deck. So for now, let's do 3. And for each card, you're going to need one block of text like this, so I'll get rid of our 4th one. And all it's left to do is change what the card is here, and once you change that, it will change what cards start in your deck. So even though we named the card Salmon, because we use the in-game card creator, the file is called igcc_salmon. Also worth mentioning, any spaces you put in the card name will show up as underscores, so we will also have a salmon_guppy. And let's give ourselves a second guppy. Now save that, close it out, and switch it back to a .cfg file. And now, before we launch the game, let's just double check we got those card names right. If we go back to the bep.in.ex folder and then go to plugins, we can see a folder for each mod we installed. JSON loader is where all of your cards are stored. We have the artwork folder where all of our custom art is stored. We'll get to that in a second. And we have our cards. You'll see a bunch of my files here, including some leftover txt files. But the gist of this is that whenever you make a file, whenever you make a card, it will make a .jldr file here. So we can see that we named these correctly, but remember this folder because we'll be coming back to it later. So let's test the card creator. We're going to go back to Thunderstore and start modded. And now that the game is loaded, we're going to start a fresh save at Leshy's cabin because the deck builder activates when you start a run. So since we were technically a battle into the last one, the deck builder wouldn't refresh anything. So as Leshy offers us some cards, we'll see our salmon and 2 salmon guppies. Perfect. Now, a quick thing I should mention here, if there is an error in the name of even one of your card files in that .cfg deck builder file, or if there is an issue with one of the cards that you're trying to add to your starting deck, the deck builder will just give you all of the default cards instead. If it is failing, I recommend just testing one card at a time so you can figure out which one is causing the problem. So, now that we've tested the deck builder, let's learn how to edit our existing cards. So first, we're going to go back to the folder where we were storing all of our cards. I'll put that file path up again. And each card is represented by one of these JLDR files. So for a salmon, I've been thinking one thing that's really characteristic of salmon is that they swim upstream. So it'd be cool to give our salmon the ability where it moves left and right across the board. So I'm going to change the salmon file to a .txt file. And if I open it up, we can see everything that makes this card tick. We have its display name, we have its description, and we have what sort of categories it shows up in. So if you wanted to, say, change it to a rare card, you could do that here. I'm also going to give it an extra point of health because who doesn't love a slightly overpowered custom card? And here in abilities is where I would add that new move left and right ability. But I don't know what to type. So I'm going to check a very handy tool that will let you check some boxes and see what sort of syntax will do what you want it to do. So if we go back to Thunderstore and click on JSON card loader, then we will get some information about it. And if we click this little link with a version number by it, it will take us to that mod's website. And I recommend looking at these for each of the mods that you've installed because it has a lot of really helpful information that you'd find in the README file on those, telling you what the mod can do, what it's for. And this one in particular has a link to a graphic user interface version for getting the syntax right for the JLDR files. If we click that link, it takes us to this website. We don't need to make a full card here, but what we need to check is the format of giving it both that submerge ability and the moving left and right ability. So if we just scroll down, here we are, abilities. And you need to use some context clues to guess what the abilities are because it's a little different than what it's called in game. So moving left and right is called strafe. And if we if we click on that, hold down control, we can also click on submerge. And if we scroll up to that text window on the right, there we are. That's how we give it both strafe and submerge. So I'll highlight this, copy, go back to our text document, and paste it over the existing submerge for the version that has both. So let's save it, go back to our files, and switch this back to a JLDR. Now, if we launch the game while modded again, we will be able to see the card with our changes. So now that we're back in the game, let's double check that our changes to the salmon card worked. Yes, there it is. It has strafe and it has 4 health. While we're on the topic of editing cards and picking abilities, if you want to actually read a list of what everything does, then you'll want to go to this file path and get this enums.md file. You can either make a copy of this file and change it to a txt like I've done here, or you can just change it from .md to .txt. Open it up, and you can read a whole list of what each option in that editor does. So here I can see that, if I want to give something the wolf secret ability, that won't actually do anything. But if I want to give it the trap spawner special ability, that will make it create a steel trap after it dies, like one of the strange frogs in the trapper fight. This is very useful when trying to figure out how do I make it do that one thing I saw in the game? So give this a browse. It's a great resource to have. And now let's take a look at card art. First, we need to go back to where our cards were. And if you'll remember, a folder over from cards, there was artwork. If we go in there, we can see all the files I've been using, and we can also see that it saves all of the images that you're using on custom cards. So even though we didn't draw our salmon, we can see that image is right here. We can open a drawing tool like Photoshop, and that will allow us to make our own art for the card following some specific requirements. First, your image has to be 114 pixels by 94 pixels. Press OK, and we have our canvas. Perfect. Now, I should mention you don't want to use any colors in this, only black shows up in game. And you also want to make sure that there is no background. This needs to be transparent to show up on the card background. Now all it's left to do is save this as a PNG, has to be a PNG, to the artwork folder. So now let's go back into the in-game card creator and we can see that updated art. Now that we have our beautiful card art, we're going to come back into the game and go to the card creator again. Remember that stand up from the table, move over to the door, click the door handle, and now we can use this art on a new card. And now that we're at the picture part, we can skip all the way to the back because first it will show all of the images you used in custom cards previously, then all of the images from Inscryption, and then finally your images in the artwork folder. So we can see here somewhere past all of my other art, here we are, our perfect salmon-y boy. And there it is on the card. And now we will export and quit. It will get added to our deck. Thank you very much, Leshy. And you might have noticed this with my other custom cards, but the artwork on it was a little bit blurry. We can get a better look at that here. It's not quite as crisp as the other art, and that is partially because I am running my game on low graphics so that it will work well with my screen recording. So if we bump up the graphics to high, we'll notice that nothing changes at first, but if we look back at the map, look back at the cards, now we can see the art is much crisper. It's still not quite perfect though, so to make it just a little bit better, pardon me while I switch back to low quality so my computer doesn't explode. To make the art a bit better, we are going to go back to our files. Back in the artwork folder, we can see that we have the IGCC version of Perfect Salmon. That is the version that we used in the card creator. There's the version we drew and the version we used. If we open this up with Photoshop real quick, or whatever drawing program you're using, you'll notice that it is a bit blurrier than we had it originally. I don't know if this is because of running the game on low when you make the card, or if it's just something that always happens, but if you want to fix it and you have a slow computer like me, all you need to do is also open your original crisp looking art and just drag that over into the other file, line it up, and delete the blurry one. If we save this, it will update the PNG to be looking nice and crisp. And now if we go back into the game, we will notice a much better looking version of our Perfect Salmon. Alright, back in Leshy's cabin, if we crank our graphics settings back up to high, we can check out our new and improved card art on the Perfect Salmon. If we apply those changes, then take a look at our deck. We can see that Perfect Salmon is looking much crisper than previously. This card art is clearly on par with anything you'd find in the game. He's perfect. Now, if I go back into my low graphic settings, yes, the card will be blurry again, unlike the usual cards in the game. Based on what I heard in the Discord, it sounds like to make the cards always look high quality, you need to use a bit of coding to change the filter variable on this texture to be no filter or point. Again, we're not using coding for this simple tutorial, so unfortunately we can't do that, but hopefully if you are passionate about your card art, that gives you a direction to look for that information. And of course, if instead of putting that art onto an entirely new card, we wanted to replace the, say, salmon guppy art, then we can just go into the cards folder, open up salmonguppy.jldr, and change the texture variable. So I could just change this from salmon guppy to perfect salmon.png, and it would show up just fine. So give yourself a round of applause because you just made your first Inscryption cards. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope there's something in it that's helpful to you or it makes the basics of this clearer. And again, if you have more in-depth questions or you want to get into the coding nitty-gritty for custom abilities or whatnot, you'll want to go to the Inscryption mod Discord. And thank you for watching, and have fun making custom cards.